Hi again. In F.F. Bruce, The Real Jesus, Chapter 10, Arrest and Trial. Now we're up to the chief priestly inquiry. The Gospels represent Jesus as having been brought before a Jewish court and then before the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. For his appearance before the Jewish court we are indebted mainly to Mark, who was followed by Matthew and Luke. His appearance before the Roman governor is recorded by all four evangelists, but the most coherent account of it is given by John. John says nothing about his appearance before a Jewish court, although he does report a preliminary inquiry held in the house of Annas, the senior ex-high priest. This inquiry, which is not mentioned in any of the other Gospels, tried to investigate more fully the nature of Jesus' teaching and the identity of his disciples. Jesus replied that his teaching was a matter of public knowledge. He had nothing to add to what he had openly taught in the temple precincts. So he was sent bound under police escort from the house of Annas to the headquarters of Caiaphas, Annas' son-in-law, the reigning high priest. It is disputed whether Jesus appeared before the Sanhedrin, the supreme court of the Jewish nation, convened in its regular judicial capacity, or before a court of inquiry. In either case, the high priests presided, and the court consisted of members of the Sanhedrin, chief priests, elders, and scribes, according to Mark 14, verse 53. But even when the Sanhedrin met as a formal court of law, the execution of a death sentence was at present beyond its competence. This was something which, in keeping with general Roman usage, the provincial governor reserved to himself. As a concession to Jewish religious sentiment, however, there was one area in which the Roman administration allowed the Sanhedrin to exercise unrestricted authority. This was the area of offenses against the sanctity of the temple. Here, no doubt, we have the explanation for the statement in Mark's account that when the court had been convened on this occasion, some witnesses affirmed that Jesus had been heard to say, "I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another, not made with hands." That was the general purport of their testimony, but they did not agree in their detailed wording, and the strict Jewish rules of evidence ruled their allegations out of court. If their evidence had been admissible, there would have been a prima facie case for the court to go ahead and deal with the charge on its own authority without any reference to the Roman governor. Nothing that Mark has recorded earlier in his gospel prepares the reader for this charge. He does indeed say that a few days before, Jesus had told his disciples that of the great buildings which made up the temple complex, not one stone would be left standing on another. It would all be demolished. This was to take place 40 years later, but nothing was said at that time of any rebuilding of the temple. John, however, throws light on the foundation for the charge when he tells how Jesus, challenged about his authority to cleanse the temple, replied, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." John 2:19. John, in the light of Jesus rising from the dead, explains that he was speaking of the temple of his body. One might think also of the temple not made with hands, to which Paul and other New Testament writers refer, using the words as a figure of speech for the new community of Jesus' followers. Whatever it was that Jesus precisely said, it stuck in people's memories. For one of the taunts hurled at him when he was on the cross was, "Ha ha, you who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." However, the attempt to convict him of a threat to the temple proved unsuccessful. No other witnesses were forthcoming on short notice, and yet it was expedient, as the high priest had decided, to have Jesus put out of harm's way as quickly as possible. For once the news of his arrest got around, there was the danger of a public or popular demonstration. So, with doubtful legality, Jesus was put in a position where he was liable to incriminate himself. "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" the high priest asked him. If he had answered this question with a simple yes, he could not have been charged with a religious offense. There is no reason to suppose that claim to be Messiah was in itself a breach of Jewish law, even when it could not be substantiated, but such a claim had political implications, which could expose anyone who made it to a charge of sedition in Roman law. For by general consent, the title Messiah was equivalent to King of the Jews, and sovereignty over the Jewish nation belonged at this time to the Roman emperor. Everyone who makes himself a king sets himself against Caesar. John 19:12. There could be no doubt about it. Jesus knew that. However he answered the high priest's question, he would incriminate himself in relation either to Jewish law or to Roman law, if not in relation to both. He made sure, therefore, that the record should be set straight and that the indictment should be framed in his own terms. If Messiah was the word the high priest and other judges chose, well and good. It was their word, not his. But if they insisted on it, he could not deny that he did claim to be the Messiah. But if he were to choose his own form of words, let them take knowledge that from now on they would see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the Almighty and coming with the clouds of heaven. Mark 14:62. The judges could scarcely believe their ears. The accused man, they reckoned, had convicted himself out of his own mouth. No need of further witnesses. This was plain blasphemy, and they had heard it for themselves. In later codifications of Jewish law, blasphemy was limited to the pronouncement of the unutterable name of the God of Israel, the name spelt with the four consonants YHWH. There is no suggestion that Jesus pronounced this name, but his language, to those who grasped its purport, implied that he was the assessor and peer of the Most High. If this did not amount to constructive blasphemy, it's difficult to imagine what did count as such. If Jesus had contented himself with claiming to be the Messiah, the Pharisaic members of the court might have deplored his claim, but they would not have regarded it as ground for a severe sentence, and they would probably not have been happy about handing him over to the Romans. But his additional words altered the situation. It was not safe for the city or the nation to let such a blasphemer go free. God would not hold them guiltless if they took no steps to restrain him. In looking at Jesus' use of the designation, the Son of Man, we have considered its relation to Daniel's vision, in which he saw a human figure, one like a Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven before the Ancient of Days to be vested with universal dominion and to take his seat beside him. The reference to Daniel's vision in Jesus' reply to the high priest's question cannot be missed. It was not unnatural to link Daniel's language with that of the oracle in Psalm 110, verse 1, where an unnamed person, identified by Jesus and his contemporaries as the Messiah, is invited to sit at God's right hand until his enemies are subdued beneath his feet. It is the oracle of Psalm 110, verse 1, that is echoed in Jesus' description of the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the Almighty. Whatever the reaction of Jesus' judges was to these words of his, their astounding implications should not be lost on us. Condemned and discredited by earthly courts, Jesus is about to be vindicated in the heavenly court. Henceforth, he will be recognized as God's agent in blessing and in judgment. It is difficult to dismiss his words so far as their present setting is concerned as Mark's creation in the light of the church's later faith in Jesus' exaltation. Essentially, the same claim, in less pictorial terms, is made by Jesus in other gospel strands, both before his passion and after his resurrection. All things have been delivered to me by my Father, according to Luke 10:22. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, Matthew 28:18. But only by his humiliation and crucifixion was this claim made good. For him, the way of suffering was the way of glory, and the same was to be true for his followers also. But there was to be little enough of glory seen during the hours that lay ahead. Next is Jesus before Pilate. I'll put in a link to Ask JW's this question. Did Jesus use the name, that is the Tetragrammaton, before the Sanhedrin? If not, why was he convicted of blasphemy? See you next time.